Is someone at the door? No? Okay. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first meeting of the North Clackamas School District Budget Committee meeting for budget development for the FY 26-27 school year. I'd like to start by welcoming back all of our returning members from last year. We have one new member, Eric Solomon, who is not present at the moment. I would also like to welcome and introduce Donna Burke, our Director of Fiscal Operations. And also want to thank Donna Collingwood, who organizes everything and makes all of this possible. I am Matt McCara, the Executive Director of Finance and Business Services for the district. So, to get started, just to go over really quickly the role of the Budget Committee. The Budget Committee serves a very important function, and it's actually laid out in Oregon revised statute. So this is laid out in state law, and it's the opportunity for the public, for members of the public, to provide some measure of input and oversight on our budget process. Community input and participation in the process is important. This structure gives that opportunity. The committee is made up of 7 elected officials and 7 appointed officials. All meetings are open to the public. There is an electing presiding officer and vice chair. Those will be voted on by the members of the Budget Committee at our first formal meeting, which is actually our 4th of 5 meetings. At that meeting, you will also be receiving the budget message and the district's proposed budget. This format provides an opportunity for the community to ask questions and make comments about the proposed budget at that meeting. And in the following meeting, the Budget Committee would have the opportunity to approve the budget and send it to the district board of directors for budget adoption. So in your handouts, in your materials, you should have a budget calendar that has all the dates. This is the March 19th meeting, the first of 3 informational meetings. Our next meeting is April 16th. So today we are really kind of approaching things from a bit of a higher level and a little more general about some of the things that are impacting the budget and some of the context to consider when we're reviewing the budget. The April 16th meeting is where we start to drill into some more specific topics in a little more detail. The third of the 3 informational meetings is on April 30th. That is usually everyone's favorite meeting because that's the meeting where our educators have a chance to come up here and present in a little more detail on some of the really awesome things that are going on in the district. After that, our first formal meeting of the Budget Committee is on May 14th. That is where the Budget Committee will elect officers, where the proposed budget will be presented and where the budget message will be read to the committee. That's also when there is an opportunity for public comment as part of the process. Then in the following meeting on May 28th, that is where the Budget Committee would have the opportunity to exercise its function of approving the budget. It would, after which it would go to the full board for budget adoption, usually at the first meeting of the board in June. I should also say, if there's anything that I'm covering that anyone has any questions about at any point, please don't hesitate to ask. You should also have in your packet as well, a list of the Budget Committee members and the membership of the committee. Budget Committee handbook and the board policy, those were distributed to the committee electronically. The book is a little bigger, so we try and not print up copies of those all the time every year. But you have those to refer back to, as well as the board policy DBEA, which covers the Budget Committee. Budget guiding principles is also something, the color slide or the color page that you have in your packet, which discusses our mission, our vision, and our budget guiding principles. I can say from having been in the process that these really are the principles that, that do guide the considerations and the decisions that are made as part of the budgeting process. So now I will turn it over to Donna Burke, who will go through the adopted budget framework, kind of the format of our adopted budget document, which also was something that was dispersed or distributed electronically to the committee membership.
Okay, welcome. The budget's made up of 3 sections per se. The first one is the organizational section. We defined it as the structure of the school district, outlining how it is governed, its mission, and how different departments or schools are organized to manage the funds. It includes things like the superintendent's budget message, which is one of the most important parts of the budget because it tells kind of where the district is, where it's been, and where it's going. Guiding principles, which Matt just discussed, the strategic plan, the equity policy, the budget process and financial overview, our organizational chart for the district, and the budget calendar. The second part of it is kind of the meat of the budget. It outlines the projected revenue and planned expenditures for the fiscal year, serving as a roadmap to align educational goals with available resources. And we have 7 different funds. The first fund, our general fund, is made up mainly of our state school fund, property tax, local levy option, fees, building, rentals. It has majority of our additional things that are not seen in the other funds up here are housed in the general fund. Then we have our special revenue fund. That's our grant funds. We have things like SIA, our title, high school success, nutrition service, and our student funds, which is not a grant, it's our student raised funds, but we house it in our special revenue. Then our third fund is our debt service fund. It's an accumulation of resources. It covers our long-term debt, both the principal and interest pieces. It is, the largest portion is probably the property taxes. And then we have our capital projects funds. And the main resources there are our sale of any bonds that we may have and the construction excise tax. Then we have community services, which that is made up of fees for service. It's our childcare, facility rentals. That is mainly a self-sustaining fund. And then we have our internal services, which is our self-insurance fund, and that is funded by employee and employer contributions. And then we have trust and agency. That one is where our charter schools are recorded. They have things like state school fund, their local levy option, that is their portion, and we record it on our books in the 700 fund, which is trust and agency. And then our last piece is our informational section. It provides context to stakeholders, taxpayers, parents, school board members, to get them to understand the district's educational goals, the demographic changes, and the rationale behind the financial decisions that North Clackamas makes. That section houses like our property tax data, enrollment history, funding history rates, our FTE by fund and program, the district report card, the graduation rates, that is always fun to see, and our notices, and also the glossary. And that's kind of an important resource because we have things when we start talking up here like ADM. If you're new, you might not know what ADM is, but it gives you what all of the acronyms that we use in the back of the book in our glossary.
All right.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Donna. I will say that by the time the document comes to this committee in kind of a finished product form, you see the end result of all the work that goes into it, but there really is, and I have to compliment Donna and our accounting team for all the work they do in getting it to that point. The budget is really made up of thousands of individual pieces of information, and the document really just synthesizes all of that, and it is, there's a lot more work that goes into that than you would think, and I just really appreciate the work that's done to get it to that point. All right, the financial report. So in here, we'll be going through some slides to talk about things like enrollment, our general, this is primarily focused on our general fund, revenues, expenses, and kind of some of the considerations and outlook for the near term. So I'll start with where it all starts and where it all gets back to, our enrollment. So this is our history. These are the numbers that are taken from October 1st. So if you look all the way back to 2019, that's October 1st, 2019. Before the pandemic, and which started in March of 2020. So you can see that was the last year, the last October before the pandemic. And then in the following year, you can see the impact that that we felt, and that all other districts across the state felt from declining enrollment during the pandemic. We were fortunate that over the next several years, we were able to bring back some students, and we saw an enrollment, a very gradual enrollment increase from 2020-21 to 2024-25. You will notice, however, that it never came, it never got really near pre-pandemic levels. That was prior to this year. This year, you will see that that there is actually a decline from last year. The previous couple years, we had been fortunate that we were the only one of the 10 largest districts in the state for 2 years running that had any kind of enrollment gains. That is no longer the case. We had a decline this year. That's our history to this point. On the next slide, I'll be showing you the projection that we have from that's been put together by our demographers, Flow Analytics. You can see 2026-27 is where we are projecting to be next year. I will mention that this is the same scale on the left-hand side that we have on the other slide. So they're really apples to apples in terms of scale. And where we are projecting to be down from 16,847 to 16,101. So a loss of over 700 students in that period is what we are anticipating when you look out that far. Obviously, that is going to have very significant implications for our financial outlook and our operations going forward. On this slide, I wanted to visualize something here. Looking back to, so this compares to the to a baseline year, which is 2018, 2019. So the last year before any pandemic impact. And what we have on the bottom, the blue line, or the blue bars, that is the enrollment, our enrollment compared to that baseline year of 2018, 2019. So you can see right away in 2020, 21, we were down 758 students. As you saw before, we were able to bring back some students and continue to have modest increases that still didn't get back to pre-pandemic levels. This year, we are down compared to last year. The red bars, on the other hand, are comparing our FTE in the general fund to that baseline year. So in other words, since 2018, 2019, we have added 157 FTE. So in other words, when you're looking at where we are in the current year, compared to the last year before any pandemic impacts, we are down 329 students, but we have added 157 additional FTE. And one thing I will also mention, the students per FTE ratio in 2018-19 was 10.6. Now it's around 9.5. Did anyone have any questions about this? Okay.
Where are most of these 157? Is this teachers? Is this administration? Or is this in your classified staff?
There's a slide. There's a slide that you will see in upcoming where we show the percentage of FTE that's budgeted and where that's distributed amongst licensed, classified, and admin. And the way that is distributed, those additional FTE roughly fall along those lines. And it's heavily weighted towards licensed and classified staff.
Will you also be explaining like the funding source that the additional staff are from? Like, are they from new state and local grants that have?
In this case, what's being presented here is all general fund.
So those 157 are all.
Yes, our general fund. Including the other, it got a little, because in that intervening years, we had ESSER funds and some other short-term funds like that kind of skewed that. So this was a much more direct presentation that didn't really bring in the short-term things there. So, state school fund. Here we're showing to give you a little background on what the state school fund is. It is the primary mechanism that the state uses to support K-12 education, and it primarily comes from lottery taxes or income taxes, lottery proceeds, and other things like marijuana taxes and corporate activity tax. The allocation method and formula considers things like weighted enrollment, which is ADMW. There's additional weighting given for students with IEPs and English language learners, students in poverty. Teacher experience is also a factor in that as well. The thought behind that being that more experienced teachers will be higher on the salary schedule. And so this is a way to offset that and not penalize districts for having more experienced staff. And transportation costs. We are reimbursed for 70% of the expenses involved in transporting students to school. So one thing that is, a couple other things that are important to consider, the weighting for students with IEPs is capped at 11%. We are higher than that. The state average is higher than that. There was some hope when the budget was being developed for this biennium. It appeared that there was some momentum to get that increased. But unfortunately, there was some uncertainty introduced to the state as a result of some changes that were happening at the federal level, and the changes that we had hoped for and that didn't materialize. The local sources here are, so the state school fund, it's comprised of local revenue in the forms of the property tax and the state school fund grant. The important thing here is really that total formula revenue. So the revenue that we get and the allocation that we get for the state school fund is that total formula revenue. The way it works is that that's the number that we receive. If we happen to collect more in property taxes, the state sends us that much less. On the other hand, if we collect less in property taxes than we were anticipating, then the state offsets that and sends us a little more so that it works out to that total formula revenue amount. The other things in there, like teacher experience, for instance, that will have an impact on the size of the per student allocation that we get. But when you look at that total formula revenue, in 24-25, we had about 12 or 13 million of that was for the transportation reimbursement. The rest of that allocation, the rest of that formula is driven directly by enrollment. There are some other things that kind of change that, that serve to increase or decrease that, but it really is outside of the reimbursement that we get for transportation. The rest of the formula is really driven by enrollment. And so when you see changes in enrollment like we saw before, that has a real and material impact on what we can expect for our state school fund. Another thing I will add is that at the moment, it appears that our allocation for next year, which is the second year of this biennium, it appears that our allocation for next year is relatively solid. This year, the state encouraged us to do some modeling to consider what a 2.5% or 5% reduction may look like in the allocation for this biennium, which was really fairly unprecedented. Usually when we have received an allocation in the form of the state school fund, it's been pretty certain. The variation comes in what we can expect from one biennium to the next, not necessarily in and whether we are going to get the full allocation that we've already received. So that is an indication that the overall risk that we face is also kind of changed a bit. In terms of our general fund revenue, what we're showing here is all of that in blue is the state school fund, and that slice of green on the top is all other revenue sources in the general fund. So over a 5-year average, the state school fund has accounted for about 85% of our total general fund revenue. So 85% of our general fund revenue comes from the state school fund, and almost all of that is driven by enrollment. You can see how one influences the other. And I will also add of that, that green area on the top, which averages about 36 million, on average about 24, 25 million of that is in the form of the local option levy. So outside of the state school fund and the local option levy, in terms of revenue, we have about 10 to 12 million outside of those sources in the general fund. So we have a very narrow number of sources in the general fund, which is where most of our FTE comes out of. So the things that influence those big items have a very large impact on the budget and our financial outlook. On the expense side, what we're showing here is the areas in blue. The dark blue, those are our salaries. The lighter blue area, those are our benefits. So you can see there in 24-25, 3/4 of our general fund expenses went directly to payroll in the form of either salaries or benefits. And that, I will say, is actually lower than in previous years. Going back, the 5-year average was actually around 80%. The reason for the difference is that we made a change to bring to utilize a third-party service to provide substitutes, licensed substitutes for us. It has been very effective in being able to fill the vacancies, the classroom subs that we need. However, it's now, because we're utilizing an outside service, it's now that expense is now showing up in purchase services, which is that dark green slice of the pie. One thing, and so then in the dark green slice, we have purchase services, which utilities, repairs, maintenance, things like that. It does include substitutes. Supplies and materials are all of the things like consumables, fuel, textbooks, computer hardware and software, things like that. Transfers are things that go to other funds, either to help support transportation equipment, help fund bus purchases, debt service, our benefits reserve, support for the nutrition fund if needed. And then other includes a whole range of things, dues and fees, property insurance, and things like that. For a bit of context, in terms of, just to really kind of illustrate where our expenses are going, if you take only PERS and health insurance, which are all in that benefits line, that accounts for more than everything in purchase services and supplies and materials combined once you take out subs. So we're basic in terms of an expense, just PERS and health insurance alone are combined to be a greater expense than pretty much all of our non-personnel expenses. So again, what that highlights is that things with most of our expenses being in personnel, going to people, investing in personnel, things that have an impact on that have an outsized impact. So just as for context, in those areas, in salaries and benefits combined in the current year, in 25-26, we have seen a 12% increase in those areas, which is higher than most. And that is, we will see the reason why in shortly. Monica, this is what the slide I was referring to. You can see here, this is the percentage distribution of our general fund FTE in the budget for the current year. You can see almost 52% is our licensed staff, about 43% are classified staff, and 5% are administrators, which includes school-based and administrators in the central office. So you can see we really try and place real emphasis on having our FTE in schools in the form of licensed staff, classified staff, and school-based administrators. PERS. So when I said that we had a 12% increase in personnel expenses year over year, a healthy percentage of that is driven by increases in our PERS expenses. What we have here are the annual PERS expenses, both actual and projected, for the previous two bienniums. The biennium that we're in now, that 25-26 year, and what we are currently anticipating for the upcoming biennium, the 27-29. You may recall last year we had a presentation on PERS here. It was an hour long. We got into a lot. Didn't get into everything that we could have covered. I won't get into everything now, but a big part of the reason why we have seen that increase is that our side accounts are expiring. We, along with many other public agencies in the state, back in the early 2000s, participated in a pension bond borrowing. It has been very successful for us. It saved us in those 20 years, has saved us over $80 million. Now we're reaching the point where that is going away. And as a result, the benefit, the rate offset that we've gotten from that investment, that is going away. So we have seen us and all other districts, all other agencies where you've had side accounts that are going away are seeing this trend. The logical question that I'm sure everyone has is, if they've worked out so well, why don't we do it again? Unfortunately, the market conditions that there need to be very specific and solid market conditions in order to make that taking out the pension bonds worthwhile, because they are not certain. There were a number of districts that in 2007, having seen the success that everyone else had in taking out pension bonds, went out for bonds of their own. 2008, the Great Recession, And each of the agencies that participated in that borrowing in 2008 have lost money over the course of those bonds. The way those work, very briefly, we or other agencies borrow money in the form of the bonds. We send that to the state, they invest it, and as long as the return that that investment gets exceeds the debt service that we're paying on it, we save that difference. For us, it was beneficial over the 20 years. That difference was in the north of $80 million. But if those market conditions aren't right, it can be a losing proposition where the debt service ends up paying, where the debt service exceeds the benefit that you realize. So it's something that we would have to be very cautious about. What I can say, though, is even this has been a substantial increase this year. It will be a substantial increase in the next biennium. However, we have been able to anticipate this. We have done what we can to prepare for this, including building reserves over time to help offset this in the short term. And then also for the upcoming biennium, we were able to put money aside over a number of years, $12 million. There was a program that the state offered called the Employer Incentive Fund, where they took, if we or any other agencies invested and created a new side account, the state would match at 25%. So we were able to take advantage of that. We had $12 million that we had already established as a PERS reserve. We were able to send that to the state and receive a $3 million match for that. So now heading into the upcoming biennium, the 27-29 biennium, and for 4 years after that, we're going to have the benefit of that side account. It doesn't benefit as much as like a full PERS bond would, but it will be a meaningful difference. And again, like 3 million of that is money that came from the state. Any questions before I move on?
Was that side account, was that something we learned about last year? Or was
Yeah.
that the previous year? Oh, so we did end up doing that?
Yeah,
Okay.
that was discussed we did discuss the Employer Incentive Fund and our intent to utilize that. We hadn't actually, the window for sending it hadn't opened at that point yet.
Got it. Thank you.
Absolutely. And while I'm mentioning it, as I mentioned before, is an example of how allocations that we have received are no longer as certain as they were. After we were approved for this, we received some word that the state was considering revoking the employer incentive funds as a cost-cutting measure. And so we had to make sure that we got the funds to them and that we had that seeded, and that they sent the 3 million to us before they changed their mind. We did. We sent it to them. We got the $3 billion. I got all. It was a little more drama with that than I would have wanted, but we have that in place. So that will be something that that does benefit us. And again, like it highlights that there is something that is shifted in terms of the risks that we have around the allocations that we have received. So here, what we are showing over time is the change in in how our revenues and expenses over time have compared. You will see that the blue area, those are our revenues. The red area, that is our expenses. As I mentioned, we could see where things were going with PERS, knowing that was going to be a very material expense that was going up in the future. So we were very intentional in trying to build our reserves while we could. That is that blue area in between the two. So we were fortunate in being able to do that. But we knew that we were preparing for more difficult times. Unfortunately, we are now entering those more difficult times. You can see in 25, 26, the off to the right, that is the projection for the current year. You can see that we are anticipating that that our expenses this year are going to exceed our revenues. If this were going off a couple years out, that's going to grow as things stand right now. And so what that leads to is here, this is our ending fund balance history and projection going over, again, over a span of 4 bienniums. You can see we are in it. We were able to maximize our fund balance in 23-24. Last year, 24-25, that was spent down some. This year, we're anticipating it goes down a little more. You can see where we're fortunately having to outspend our revenues this year. And then, as it stands, there is that we are projecting that our ending fund balance, when you go out 3 years, as far as 28, 29, that it could project to as low as 8.5% on our current trajectory. One thing I will point out, you will see that 10% line. Recently, the board updated our ending fund balance policy from the minimum fund balance required from 5% to 10%. That is really, it is a very significant and very beneficial change. As we'll see on the next slide, why is ending fund balance important? The ending fund balance functions as our financial reserves. So having a policy that requires us maintaining a minimum of 10% means that we will keep and have reserves at a higher level, which helps our financial sustainability. It's calculated as a percentage of all general fund resources. Again, there's a minimum 10% per board policy. And we refer to it as ending fund balance, but I really like to think of it more as highlighting and emphasizing that it does function as our reserves, because it's not a leftover, what we have left at the end of the year. It really is a very intentional part of our financial planning. It exists for things like, as I mentioned, preparing for increased PERS expenses, knowing that the 20 years bonded PERS side account we had were ending, protecting against the loss of any state or federal funds and any revenue fluctuations there. Having a higher ending fund balance helps maintain our bond rating. When we were preparing last year to do a refinancing on some of our previous bonded debt in order to better position ourselves for our next bond offering, I was on the ratings call, and the ratings analyst, we went through a really excellent presentation highlighting some of the really awesome things that are going on, highlighting our financial sustainability. And the ratings analyst was, that is really great. What's your fund balance projected to be? That was what was important. All the other stuff was really a secondary consideration. So that does have a very material impact there. It also helps us where needed to help preserve physical assets and any kind of unfunded maintenance that we may have. We're going forward with a bond offering in the fall, but absent a bond, in the intervening years, there are things that come up that we need to be able to address, and being able to have financial reserves is one of the ways in order to do that. And another area is addressing anything that's unfunded or unexpected. From time to time, there may be legislation that the state passes which will create unfunded mandates. And so this is one of the ways our fund balance and reserves are one of the ways that we can help offset the impacts of those. So these are all the reasons that fund balance is critical. But one thing that I will point out that we don't see here is one of the things that fund balance is not for, and one of the things that it cannot do is maintain ongoing operational expenses over a long period of time. We can use it to help offset short-term impacts, to kind of give us a little more time to prepare for something. But over time, the only way to really be financially sustainable is to calibrate your revenues and your expenses. You can only really fund your ongoing operations with your ongoing revenue. Fund balance helps smooth things out. It helps create resilience, but you can't fund your operations indefinitely through fund balance. So, having looked at all of that, in a kind of a broad picture, these are the biggest considerations that we have. These are some considerations that are real in our budget development for 26-27. The first thing are the anticipated enrollment declines that we've seen, both short and long term. Another thing that will have a material impact on our financial, that will have a material financial outlook or impact is the result of our collective bargaining processes. We are in collective bargaining with our licensed teachers union right now, NCEA. We are, and then next fall, or next spring, we will be in collective bargaining with our classified union, OSEA. Another thing that will have an impact is we are anticipating so we will continue to have the high rate in our 26-27 budget, but we also need to be prepared for a higher rate in 27-29. Based on the advisory rates that we've gotten, I would expect that our PERS rates would go from about 17% to about 24%. So in other words, for every $100 of salary, now we are paying $17 in PERS. The higher rate, we would then be paying $24 in PERS for every $100 in payroll. Again, we're looking at, we've made it clear that we want to be a part of any kind of analysis we want to be at the table for any consideration of any future pension bonds. That's going to require some level of market stability. that remains to be seen, whether that's going to be feasible or not. Another thing we're also dealing with is the continued inflationary effect of things like tariffs, rising fuel costs, things like that. Recently, the tariffs had an impact on what we were expecting to pay for things like Chromebooks. So there was a very real and direct impact there. Where fuel costs go, that definitely remains to be seen. One thing I want to point out, though, as far as prices go that were impacted by tariffs, once prices go up because of tariffs, they tend to stay there, even if the tariff goes away. The price is created by the seller. Once they've risen the price, or they see the tariff, we don't, other than in the higher cost. Once the tariff goes away, there's nothing to bring the price back down. So once the prices go up because of tariffs, they tend to stay there. Another thing that we are seeing is the direct and kind of indirect impacts of uncertainty for federal funding. Directly, in things like, I'll actually go to the second bullet point here, the reductions to state allocations for titles 1A and D, 2A and 4A. The allocations that the state has gotten from the federal government have gone down. We have not gotten our allocations from the state, but the allocations that the state has received for those have gone down in the neighborhood from say like 1 to 4 or 5%. So we'll have to see where our final allocations are there. With our state grants, like student investment accounts, SSA, those have remained, the Student Success Act, those have remained relatively flat. That sounds good, or sounds like not bad on the surface, but the thing that you have to remember there is that if most of those grants are going towards personnel and personnel costs are going up by 12%, we can't do as much with that if it remains flat. If those don't stay if those don't rise with the costs that we're seeing, then it functions as a decrease. And then the last thing I'll mention here is that we are preparing for to put a general obligation bond, construction bond, on the November ballot, or I should say, not a construction bond, a facilities bond on our November ballot. That will have an impact in a couple different ways. One, we'll have a presentation on that in our next meeting. It's also going to be a very significant focus of the district between now and then. And there will be a budgetary impact that we see in that we will have to prepare a budget with the understanding that we will have a successful bond so that we will have the necessary appropriations to be able to go forward with that. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. What stage is the bargaining with NCA at? Have there been financial proposals at the table already, or will there be while we're in this process so that we have some idea of the fiscal impact of that?
Yeah, we are, the process is ongoing. We haven't, the fiscal proposals will certainly be a part of that. There have been some proposals exchanged that would have a financial impact. So, yeah, so to the extent that there is progress in the bargaining, that can be brought forward as part of this, but it's still an ongoing process. Any other questions? No. So, in conclusion, as we've seen, the combination of decreasing enrollment and increasing costs is not sustainable over time. And that's going to require right sizing in order for us to be able to remain, to have long-term financial sustainability. So that's a lot to think about. It's a lot to consider. One thing I will say, though, is as we find ourselves in a better position and better prepared for this than most any of our peers. If you don't have to spend much time watching the news to see that there are really pretty significant cuts being made across the board with some of our other peers. PPS is looking at 3 furlough days this year alone to, as well as trying to cut out $20 million in the current year budget for them. So even though this is a lot, and even though these are things that we'll need to do to right size to be able to continue to be have long-term financial sustainability, the scope of what we're looking at and the position that we find ourselves are much better than our peers. I would rather be here than anywhere else in the state, and I can say that with absolute confidence. The long-term financial sustainability is really critical because there's no difference between financial sustainability and operational sustainability. Maintaining financial stability is how we're able to have educational stability, being able to put in place and support programs over a long period of time where we're able to see the benefits from those and not have really volatile cuts up and down. I think that is being able to right size, to recognize the changing enrollment pattern that we have, and recognizing the financial challenges that we have. Addressing that head on is really what will allow us to have financial sustainability and operational stability heading into the future. I would be happy to try and answer any questions that anyone may have.
Is there any projections as far as retirement, looking forward to as our enrollment drops, obviously our staff ages? Have we looked at those numbers and what we're looking at projected retirement to kind of absorb some of those cuts that we'll need to make in the future?
Yes, whenever we do have to make any FTE reductions like that, we always try and look first for places like retirements or vacancies or things like that. First, to be able to look at those areas first. We try and do that as much as we can, but we may not be able to do that entirely.
Matt, thank you for all this material and information and the process ahead. Glad you're guiding us through it.
Thank you.
The most significant thing I see, lots of significant headwinds against us, but maybe the most is the enrollment declines.
Yeah.
Is that even across the district? Are there places in North Clackamas schools that are staying steady, increasing? Can we be more granular around that?
Yeah, there was, we had a really excellent presentation from our demographers, Flow Analytics, during a recent board meeting. Well, so I think the enrollment changes are felt a little differently in different parts of the district. There's some areas where there is, I would not want to try and give a comprehensive answer to that off the top of my head. So I'd like to look and provide a little more. But yes, we are expecting that enrollment declines like that will be felt and experienced across the district, but the level to which it's experienced in different parts of the district, there may be changes there, but I'll definitely get more information and provide a more comprehensive answer for our next meeting. Eric.
So I have a few things. Just looking at everything, looks like it's a downward trend with enrollment, and it's glad.
Yes.
I'm glad that we are approaching it as with a proactive approach instead of reactionary. And the reality is we're going to be operating at a negative cash flow. So I mean, I have tons of questions, but I think what this is going to boil down to is really taking a look at our expenses, like you mentioned, and seeing what we need to do there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think one thing that's an important consideration to keep in mind is that with declining enrollment, it's not just the financial impact that does also have an impact on the services that we need to provide. So we need to be able to scale the services that we're providing, the staff that we have to the reality of the size of our student population.
So real quick, on the fund where the charter schools was, can you go a little bit further into that? I know you said that the decision was made to have that go into our books essentially. Are those funds, how do they look on a balance sheet? Are they restricted, or how does that look from just looking at where those funds are right now with the district?
So we use the 700 fund more as a recording. We're kind of recording, we pay for like our charter schools, their payroll process through here, but we don't take that on as our expense. So we record it in the 700 fund, not our general fund. So we can see what's happening, what's coming in and what's going out. Does that make sense?
We, in our state school fund, we receive revenue from the state for the charter schools. So the money that comes to us, we're kind of a pass-through for that then goes to the charter schools. All right, well.
Matt, I have a question really quick.
Yes, absolutely.
The decline in enrollment, in my mind, the story in my head is I'm under the assumption that districts across the state are feeling that as well. Can you kind of at least ballpark for us how this district is faring in the decline in enrollment in comparison to other districts?
So so far this year, across the state, the number is approximately 5,000. So as a percentage, that we are declining, but our decrease is proportionately less than the rest of the state. So we are feeling part of the trend, or part of that overall dynamic that is being felt across the rest of the state. But there we are faring a little better than the rest of the state. However, I think one of the important considerations there is that even if we are down less than everyone else, less is less. And if there is a decrease over time across the state, even if we continued to have a smaller decrease or an increase or anything else, if the total enrollment is down significantly across the state, the risk there is that that will impact the overall state support for education, that it may become somewhat of less of a priority if there continue to be significant enrollment decreases across the state.
I realized I had a follow-up question on Monica's question earlier about the additional 157 FTE. You did share the slide that showed the percent distribution of total FTE, but I'm curious about the 157 additional. Do we have numbers on what the distribution of that is? I mean, 20 new administrators is obviously quite a bit more of an expense than 20 new para educators. So I'm wondering if we have
Yeah,
that
I
information.
can, I would be happy to look into that and
Okay.
get more specifics.
Thank you.
I have a
Because I was kind of wondering the same thing, but didn't we open a bunch of new schools? And that requires, is that where the FD came from possibly?
Well, yeah, I would want to, I don't want to make, I want to make sure I'm going back and checking and getting specifics about the overall, but yes.
Matt, just following on Eric's astute observation that expenses are going to need to be reduced somehow. Do you have a percentage target in mind or a range that you could share that we can kind of wrap our minds around? Sort of preparing ourselves for a 5% reduction, a 10% reduction, a 1% reduction? I mean, do you have a range we should start to think about and socialize in our own minds?
We are anticipating a decrease coming in the upcoming year in the general fund of about 25 FTE. So in terms, we're still in the process of developing the budget, so we don't have a specific overall number at this point, but we are kind of preparing for things in the context of what we've been looking at. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming out and participating tonight, and I will welcome everyone back at our next meeting on April 16th. Thank you.